So, mayong adlaw sa tanan. Uh, I am Engine Cadet Veraki Jimenez and together with me is my partner, Engine Cadet Villasis Anthony. So, our topic is about the indigenous people of the Philippines. So, when we say indigenous people or indigenous, this refers to a group of people that original inhabitant in a particular region or territory. Also, this refers to a shared common bond of languages, cultural. So, do you have any idea who are these indigenous people in our country? So, later, we will discuss their culture. But of course, we know that there are a lot of indigenous people in our country here in Philippines. So we cannot describe their culture tagsa-tagsa. So atong baton is to describe na lang their common or their similar nga mga culture in different regions in Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Next.
So, background. So, the Philippines has a total land area of 30 million hectares, and half of the country is hilly and mostly categorized as a forest zone and part of the public domain. So, our country has a total land area of 30 million hectares, or it is equivalent to about 300,000 square meter land area. And half of the country land area is hilly and upland, so mga bukid o bungtod ari sa Pilipinas. And mostly categorized and majority sa itong mga bukid ari sa Pilipinas is kakahuyan pa gyud siya and it is part of the public domain. So public domain, it means that it is for everyone. So it is for everyone and it is managed by the government nga i-allow tang mga tawo nga mobuhat og recreational activities like hiking, mountain biking, o uban pa nga atong gusto buhaton ato sa bukid. Nga di na ta kailangan og permission nga mobuhat ana because it is meant for everyone nga i-enjoy kung unsa tong ganahan buhaton ato sa bukid. So as of the year 2005, the country has a population of 85 million. There are 112 ethno-linguistic groups in the country who comprise nearly 15% of the total population of the country. So in the year 2005 daw, our total population is 85 million. And 15% of the total population is the 112 ethno-linguistic group or the indigenous people communities. So if atong kwintahon ang 85 million times 15% sa ethno-linguistic groups is mo equivalent siya to 12 million 12 million 750,000. So kanang 12,750,000 is muna sila ang number of people na nabilong sa ethno-linguistic group or the indigenous people. So unsa din ni ang ethno-linguistic group? So it is a community of people who share belief, tradition, culture, and languages. And if atong i-minus ang 85 million minus 12,750,000 is mo equivalent siya to 72,250,000. So kanang 72,250,000 is the number of people nga wala mabilong sa indigenous people. So kita na mga tao nga naa sa lowland nga wala ma-appeal sa indigenous people. So the Philippines is slowly losing its forest cover and has to cope with an influx of mining activities in the uplands. Furthermore, demand for land and natural resources continue to rise with the unabated migration of lowlands families into the mountains. Thus, there exists a very volatile mix of stakeholders who are in a very strict competition for the limited resources of the uplands. So, because of the increase of the mining activity that we do humans, our uplands is slowly losing its forest. So, nisamot pa gyud nga kanang because of the mining activity nga gibuhat nato is nagkagamay ang balay sa indigenous people. And nisamot pa gyud nga kitang mga tawo nga katong akong giingon sa 72 million 250,000 katong mga tawo nga wala mabilong sa indigenous people is we are multiplying every day. So imagine pag year 2005 ni total na tayo nga number of population. How much ka karon nga 2024 na ta. So because of that is muna siya'y naghatag og rason nganong ang demand sa yuta og resources is grabe ka pangitaon. Nisamot pa gyud nga may naay mga ni-migrate sa 'tong lugar, like dili gyud sila usually taga diri but because of the demand of the land and natural resources is nibalhin sila. And also naay mga lowlands families nga tungod kay nidaghan na ta limit na lang atong yuta kapuy-an diri sa lowlands munang ganahan na sad sila mopuyo ngadto sa uplands. So tungod ani is ang kompetensya is grabe kataas. Kay ang yuta karon is pangitaon na kaayo nga kulang na lang mag-away ang mga tao para ani. So a vast majority of the 12 million population of indigenous people in the Philippines reside in the uplands which they claim as part of their traditional territories. So we all know that majority sa indigenous people communities is nagpuyo gid sila sa uplands ato sa bukid. And they claim as part of their traditional territories. So they believe that if diya sila katutubo sila, diya sila nabuhi, diya gyud sila nidako ilang community is ilaha ng kuan nga ilaha gyud ng yuta because it is part of their tradition. So ilaha na nga without title or perma nga nagpamatuod nga kanang yuta is ilaha. If diya ka nabuhi is automatic inyuha na gyud ng teritoryo or ancestral domain. So most of the remaining natural resources in the country are found within the traditional lands of the indigenous people. So um one of the reason nganong for me lang what I think one of the reason nganong mas daghan pa og natural resources ang uplands compared sa lowlands is that because of technology advancement. So like we all know that kita diri sa lowlands, kitang mga tao nga wala mabilong sa indigenous people is we are developing our technology advancement every day. So mas ni kuan ang adlaw naka-develop ta compared sa indigenous people communities nga wala gyud sila mo-adapt ana. So like for example, kita diri natay tools and machines para mukaut sa mga atong natural resources. So ato sa bukid, so wala sila mo-adapt ana, wala sila tools and machines para mukaut like gold, silang mga kahoy para putol. So wala sila ana. So next slide. So Republic Act 8371 or the also known as the Indigenous People Rights Act or the IPRA of 1997. So what it was implemented by the National Commission of the Indigenous People or the NCIP. The NCIP is also known as the Philippine Government Agency. So the NCIP is tasked with promoting the welfare and promoting the rights of the indigenous people of the Philippines, and it was implemented and it is signed by our President Fidel V. Ramos on October 29, 1997. So Republic Act 8371 recognizes the rights of ownership of IP communities over their ancestral lands and domains. So this Republic Act 8371 is it allows the indigenous people community to have an and pow authority and power over the land where they traditionally live. And also this Republic Act support and defend the indigenous people communities nga gi-support sila nga to have self-governance, like they can manage their own rules and regulations within their community. So and also this Republic Act is gives the indigenous people a right to manage their own resources by their own. So next is the Republic Act 8371 follows the principle of self-delineation in the idea of ancestral domain. So the law allows the indigenous people to have the power or authority to have to decide and mark the boundaries of the areas that they consider as their traditional land, including sacred sites, hunting grounds, and agricultural lands, and other areas of cultural significance. Nya, kaning Republic Act is ni protect sila sa territory sa indigenous people nga dili makawat sa uban. So next is the Republic Act 8371 respects the traditional resource management practices of the indigenous people communities. So this Republic Act is iyang gi-acknowledge ang existence sa indigenous people communities like even self-governance sila but i-recognize gyapon nato sila as part of our society like even like sila practices. So like for example nga like sa kasal diri sa lowlands ato 'di ba? If kung if kung matawag ang usa ka minyo nga kanang officially couple na sila is makinahanglan og simbahan, pari, witness. But adto sa indigenous people communities if lain sila og practices like dili na sila makinahanglan ana, but still matawag gyapon nato sila og minyo because it is part of their tradition nga muna ilang rules nga balaod nga 'to. So muna ilang practices. So next is Republic Act 8371 defines for a process of recovery of lost ancestral domains. So this Republic Act is tabangan nila ang indigenous people communities in kasog makawat ang ilang ancestral domains or ilang teritoryo. So nay-process ani nga mauli sa ilaha. So last is Republic Act 8371 institutionalizes the role of NGOs in the delineation of process. So this law allows the NGO or the non-government organization to have an authority nga sila ang motabang sa indigenous people communities nga mas ma-recognize sila sa atoang society. Like sila like makahibaw ta nga may-exist sila sa atong society. So sila ang mo-help.
So, who are the indigenous people or the IPs? So, officially, the indigenous people are identified by the Indigenous Rights Act of 1997 as what my partner said. So, this act is popularly known as the EPRA. So, the law was passed in the Congress and signed by the late President Fidel B. Ramos on October of 1997 under the Section 3H of the law. So, as identified by the Indigenous People Rights Act of 1997, or simply EPRA, the indigenous people are first a group of people. So, it is a group of people or a homogeneous societies. So, a societies where the majority of its members share common cultural, ethnic, religious, and other linguistic background, which their people tend to have mga similar nga mga values, traditions, and beliefs. So it is also identified by self-ascription and ascription by others. So when we say ascription, it pertains to a certain characteristics or qualities associated to a person, places, or things. Self-ascription means that the claim of the people themselves. So ang claim nila sa ilang kagalingon on who they are. And ascription by others or ascription on others means how others or how we recognize them as such. The next, continuously live as organized community on commonly bounded and defined territory. So according to the indigenous people, differs on how we view territory. So sa atong case, we measure boundaries by meters, kilometers, for hectares. So in measuring boundaries, we use different kinds of equipment or tools such as GPS, tape measure, and measuring mga short distance. But however, for IPs or for the indigenous people, they measure things by natural characteristics or what is the landmark they could easily recognize, like trees, rivers, or rocks, which defining the limit. Then next, have under claims and utilize such territories. So this part refers to the claims of the territories as far as they could remember. These usually are the knowledge or information that are that are handed down by generation to generation through through oral tradition. And also, identified people are indigenous people are identified of sharing common bond of languages, customs, traditions, and other distinctive cultural traits. Next, please. So here we can see the estimated number of the indigenous people in our country, in the Philippines. So sa left side, we can see the different region where we can see the communities or the indigenous people living in the different interiors of Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. So we know that the Philippines is a culturally diverse country. So the IPs comprise 17% of the total Philippine population. And majority of the IPs, as what we can see in the graph, is from Mindanao, which have 61%, and followed by Luzon, 36%, and some in the Visayas, which have 3%. So there is no actual count for this one number of indigenous people. The estimated number is around 12.8 million, but this number is from 1995 pa. So based sa among research sa bag-o nga data karon, it an estimated number of the indigenous people is around 14 to 17 million indigenous people and belonging to 110 to 112 ethno-linguistic groups. Next. So here are the different indigenous people in our country, in the Philippines. So as what I've said ganina no, that there are a lot of indigenous people in the Philippines. So dili ni nato sila matagsa-tagsa og dili nato matagsa-tagsa og describe ang ilang culture because sa kadaghan. So atong buhaton is to describe their common or their similar nga mga culture. So if you will ask guys nganong what is the reason nganong naan sila mga similar nga mga culture or mga common nga culture despite that they are living in the different regions in Luzon. Not just in Luzon but also in Visayas and Mindanao. So some of the reasons nganong naan sila mga pare-pareho nga culture usani is kaning shared history of migration, interaction sa usa ka grupo to other groups, and also kaning cultural trade. So sa pag-share og mga knowledge which ni result sa pag-adapt sa mga laing groupings pod is kaning one environmental influence sa ilang gipuy-an nga mga environment, which despite that we are living in different region, naagya po ni kaning influence sa ilang environment which magdevelop sa ilahaw kaning mga pare-pareho o kaning mga agricultural practices and also kaning structure sa ilang mga panimalay. So in CAR or Cordillera Administrative Region and Region 1, Region 2, Region 3, and rest of the Luzon, their common nga mga customs and traditions is kaning agricultural practices, which they have traditional practices including terrace farming. So one of the most common example of their terrace farming is katong sa Banawi rice terraces. So we know that some of the indigenous people in Luzon are living in uplands. So we expect that dili kayo ta kakita og mga flat surface of area dito para matamnan nila. So they instead of kanang mangita og flat surface of area, they use this kaning terrace farming method. Then another common example of their customs and traditions is kaning festivals and rituals, which mostly held nila through the year to celebrate harvest seasons, ancestral spirits, deaths, marriage, or mga important events sa ilang life. So if they do festivals and rituals, so this will involve mga traditional music and dances nga original nga ilaha. Then for their common or similar beliefs is they have this ancestral worship. So indigenous groups sa Luzon and different region, they have strong belief in ancestral spirits and often practice rituals to honor and communicate with their ancestors. Also, they have this um, healing practices which they use rituals and use herbal medicine to heal the sick and maintain spiritual balance. Then, for their values, common values sa indigenous people in Luzon is they have this um, respect for their elders because they believe that ang pagrespeto sa ilang mga katiguangan is very important because di nakita nila ilang kaugalingon as the keepers of the traditional knowledge and wisdom. And then for the social practices of the IPs in Luzon is they have this kind of common traditional crafts and skills such as weaving, wood carving, basketry, and pottery, which is gipasa-pasa pa from generation to generation. Then, in island group, 4, 6, and 7. 6 is Western Visayas and 7 is in Central Visayas. Their common na mga culture is kaning artistic skills in wood carving, basket making, and weaving. Also, they are known for their traditional music and dance forms, which showcasing their vibrant cultural expression. And another common nga mga culture nila is they have this unique way of life nga nakacentered around sa hunting and gathering. Then these they this kuan pod na mga groups is they also celebrate festivals by showcase their traditional music, dance, and costumes. Then they have also common spiritual beliefs and practices such as ancestor worship, and lastly they have also traditional practices including farming, hunting, weaving, and basket making. So in Luzon, in Mindanao, particularly in southern and eastern Mindanao, northern and western and central Mindanao, their common examples of their customs and traditions is kaning connection nila sa land and nature, which IPs in Mindanao have deep spiritual connections to their ancestral lands and the natural environment. Also, they practice farming methods such as within agriculture. So, unlike in Luzon, they use terrace farming para maka-farm sila. So in Mindanao is they use this within agriculture, which is ang pagsunog sa field para matamnan og mga crops in a short period of time. So mao na ilang gigamit para makatanom sila. Mao na ilang gigamit nga method para makatanom sila. And they also have kaning traditional knowledge or of herbal medicine and natural resources. So IPs and their groups in Mindanao is na-influence pod sa mga Islam or Islamic. So which this ang ilang Islamic belief and practices include prayer, fasting, and adherence to Islamic law, which are integral to the daily lives of these communities. Then for their values, their common values is that they are hospitable sa mga laing mga tao and other groups. And also they have this spirituality beliefs. They have um they have rituals, offerings, ceremonies which they do seek blessings. And for their tradition, they have this kaning traditional leadership which is kaning datu or panglema which nagplay og important roles in governance, conflict resolution, and preservation of their cultural heritage. Also pod, their traditional clothing and crafts, which their clothes or crafts is may mga patterns and symbolic design, and therefore common social practices. And Mindanao is they have this weaving, basketry, pottery, carving, and traditional arts, which these social practices then does not only serve as kanang mga purposes sa ilang mga panimalay, but also this social practices nga ilang gipamuhat is nag-carry og symbolic meaning and cultural significance which nag-reflect sa ilang indigenous identity and values. So overall, at the end, it is important to know and understand that each group has its own unique cultural identity and practices that reflects their specific heritage. So that's all for the indigenous people of the Philippines. Thank you. Thank you everyone for listening.
And then I pray.
Okay na, pre?
Okay na, Goro, eh.